Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the panelists for coming today, and I'd like to thank you for what you do to regulate the securities industry. And I just want to kind of put all this budget stuff in context. You know, America's broke, and we're running a $1.5 trillion annual deficit, and we have a $14 trillion national debt. And my daughter, Sarah, who's 18 months old, owes $45,000 as her share of the national debt. And I'm not asking about your specific expenditure here, but how many of the panelists think it's morally okay for us to borrow $1.5 trillion from our kids every year? If you do think it's okay, raise your hand. Because I don't think it's okay, and I don't see anybody raising their hands. And I know that you're required to do a lot of new things under Dodd-Frank, so I'm not trying to be negative here. You're required to create 123 new rules. You're required to do 32 new studies. And I guess my point is, during this time of really expansive government, and frankly, in a time when we can't afford everything we're doing, I think it's a time to really focus and prioritize. So I wanted to ask some questions about that. Has the SEC looked at all its activities and tried to recommend things that can be cut or reduced, or savings that can be found in the SEC? Because maybe you have, that I haven't seen it, and I don't know who the right person to ask that is to. Would anybody like to take a shot at that one?
Sorry, I can start us off. We're just now going to be receiving the recommendations from the study that was done of our organizational structure from the Boston Consulting Group, and we will very carefully review those recommendations and see what cost savings are available from that. I think that's a
great answer. Thank you, and I appreciate you doing that.
Okay.
That's great. Second question: do you do cost-benefit analysis on every rule that you perform, and do you make that public?
Yes, we do. The rulemaking in the second half of the rules, after we describe in the beginning of the release what the rule proposal is, the second half of it includes a robust cost-benefit analysis, and we have a new division of risk strategy and financial innovation that has top-notch economists in it who help us with that. And we get public comment on the cost-benefit analysis and often make changes to our final rule based on the comments we receive on the cost-benefit analysis.
Thank you. I know that under Dodd-Frank there was language that required you to look at the fiduciary duty, and broker-dealers are currently just under a suitability standard for investors, and there's a proposal to take them to a fiduciary duty standard, and that I've seen studies that say that will increase costs for consumers and increase litigation. Have you looked at that as part of your cost-benefit analysis with regard to that particular regulation? I can't.
Sorry. We haven't issued any proposed rules on that. Certainly and there is no statutory time frame to issue proposed rules. So at such time as the Commission does issue proposed rules, there'll be a cost-benefit analysis of that.
And it will include the potential increased cost of litigation and increased cost to consumers of changing that standard for broker-dealers.
We'll work with our economists to take into account all the direct costs.
I'd like to ask you to specifically take a look at that. Now I'd like to look at something that Mr. Royce, Mr. Peters, Mr. Hurd have all talked about, and that's private equity funds. And you know, we have a lot of mezzanine-based funds in all our jurisdictions that help create jobs. And you know, I have one, for example, in my area, and they do all SBIC funds now, but they have some old legacy funds that would require them to register because they don't get an exemption if they have any non-SBIC funds, but they, frankly, it would cost them about $300,000 to register and then about $50,000 a year in round numbers on an ongoing basis. Is there any thought, and those old funds are obviously just running off, is there any thought to taking a look at folks like that and saying, okay, you kind of meet the spirit here?
This is why, you know, it is so valuable to get feedback through the comment process, and your points are well taken.
Great. And the last question on derivatives, I want to thank you for what you've done on derivatives regulation in a very thoughtful way that looks at the Securities and Exchange Act 1934, has similar definitions to the Act, but the CFTC has not been as thoughtful. Are you working with them to harmonize things? And you can give me a yes or no because I'm out of time.
Yes.
Oh, good.
As best
Very
we can. We have certain rules that we have to issue jointly, and there are certain rules that we're seeking to, we have to collaborate and reach a comparable result where it's appropriate. So we will be working with them to
But you recognize where your rules today conflict.
we recognize that there are some differences, and we recognize that we need to focus on that in terms of reducing the burdens on the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Stivers. Mr. Cook. Chair is going to take the